Good morning. It's Happy Tuesday. It's Tuesday, right? Welcome for welcome to our Facebook Live session. I feel like I'm still waking up. Today we're going to talk about boundary setting and why it's important. But before we launch into that, we just want to connect on reminding our viewers on how best to reach us at Family Caregivers of BC. So just a reminder that we're currently receiving phone calls on our caregiver support line Monday to Friday between 8:30 and 7 p.m. If you're an active user on Facebook, you can send us questions, ideas, and concerns through Messenger, and we'll make sure that we monitor that inbox on a regular basis. We also just like to remind people about confidentiality on Facebook because, of course, it's a public place. Anything that you share or any content that you share, it can't be protected through our confidentiality policy. We do take it very seriously, and so we do remind individuals to be mindful of what they're posting and sharing on the Facebook forum. Also, just to remember that your experiences, our experiences, and the information that we express, they're meant to speak to caregivers on a very general level, and so they may not actually reflect what you're going personally through at this moment or necessarily match your value set. So just a reminder, it's a general conversation that we're hoping to reach as many caregivers as possible. Please make sure you check our website regularly, you sign up for our newsletter, watch our social media feeds as we try to provide regular updates on various topics and recommendations right now through COVID. So as I mentioned earlier, today we are talking about boundary setting. And I'm not sure about you, but I put my boundary setting practice in the same vein as my yoga practice. Sometimes it's like really good and I'm spot on and I'm really consistent, and then other times not so good. I feel like it's out the window. I'm not staying true to what yoga brings, to me, which is this wonderful, feeling of being grounded and feeling as though I have this really good, strong internal locus of control. And I'm always wondering when I fall off my yoga practice, why did I fall off the yoga practice? I find it very similar with boundary setting practice. So that's my little personal experience into boundary setting. There's a great quote by Oprah Winfrey, and she says, I think she says it quite well. You have to be able to set boundaries. Otherwise, the rest of the world is telling you who you are and what you should be doing. And so you can still be a nice person and set boundaries. So one of the most common challenges we hear from caregivers is that it's really hard to say no. That's not the only type of boundary setting, but that's one of the most common calls that we receive through Family Caregivers of BC. And we recognize that boundary setting takes practice. So, something we often hear, for example, is family caregivers will say, sure, I'll help, no problem. And then as soon as they speak the words, they're asking themselves, like internally, why did I say yes? I don't have time for this or energy for this right now. Why did I just agree to do that? Sometimes we just say automatically because we're people pleasers or we feel emotionally tied to a caregiving situation. Sometimes we feel guilty, and sometimes we even just say yes, even before we think about what it might involve or how it might impact us. And then sometimes what can happen is that it can end up becoming a bit of a standard that we try to maintain or attain. And in some cases, with some of the caregivers that we speak to, the other person they're caring for or the parties involved in caring expect a yes from us. As we mentioned earlier, sometimes boundaries are really rigid. So on the flip side, sometimes there's this strong need to protect ourselves, and we can feel defensive or we can even act defensive. And we don't want to lose our connection to ourselves if we say yes to someone else or connect to someone else. And so sometimes, what happens is we will say no quite regularly. And often people might suggest to us that we're a bit harsh in our response or we're disconnected. That's another type of area around boundary setting. So why are boundaries important? Well, first of all, they're essential to knowing who we are and how to take care of ourselves. When we're in a caregiving role without boundaries, we can experience resentment, frustration, fatigue, and sometimes burnout. And so setting good boundaries or setting boundaries make caregiving sustainable. And without those boundaries in place, we can feel very vulnerable to compassion fatigue and ultimately, feeling overwhelmed and burnt out with our caregiving role. And also, I think, and what others will also support is that boundaries show a real respect for the autonomy and independence of others. And that's also, really important too in that whole boundary setting process. So setting boundaries and being a resilient caregiver is about recognizing our own lives, our own family and work. It's towards striving to caregive within those limits. What it doesn't mean is that we're not dedicated to caring. It's actually quite the opposite. Setting boundaries allow caregivers to continue to care with compassion and devotion without losing themselves completely. It's a real sign of self-respect to not feel lost or swallowed up by the caregiving role. Healthy boundaries let caregivers maintain this emotional connection to the person they're caring for without too much of the negative results of feeling the need to either fix something or be there for someone all the time, to maybe feel like at times they're enabling or rescuing. And so, setting healthy boundaries is really important. Some tips for setting boundaries. So first of all, I am no expert in boundary setting, and so the information that we're presenting today is this great accumulation of some of the wonderful facilitators and guest speakers and guest writers that we've had at Family Caregivers of BC. And we're going to talk a bit about some of those resources towards the end. Also just through some really great reading that I've personally done, but that also I know that others have done as resources, and we'll get to those as well. So tips for boundaries. Well, one of the great questions to ask is, what keeps you coming back for more? So it takes two to do the boundary tango. Are you feeling guilty because you feel like you're not doing enough? Are you scared about being hurt, so you separate from the person you're caring for? Maybe you're worried that if you're vulnerable and speak your truth, that people, might get angry, or you'll lose that connection with the other person. Maybe it's a desire to please. Once it can help kind of identify what the underlying reason is, or help figure out that boundary that you're trying to create, it can make it easier to set boundaries. Easier said than done. All of us know that. Know your limits. You can't set good boundaries if you're unsure of where you stand. And so this understanding of what you can tolerate and accept. Boundaries are physical, emotional, spiritual, mental, and so getting a sense of your boundary around yourself in those domains are really important. Knowing what makes you feel uncomfortable or stressed. So sometimes feeling discomfort and resentment are real warning signs that we're out of sync with our boundaries. So if you're feeling like you're being taken advantage of or not being appreciated, it may reflect that you're pushing yourself too much. And again, what are those reasons? Is it due to guilt? Is it wanting to please? Is it, feeling like you have to be there for that person? Or if that person that you're caring for, or even another family member who's maybe long distance, is imposing their expectations, views, or values on us, that can also cross over our boundary line. So understanding some of those trigger points, or understanding where, what we're willing to accept and not accept, is also a real area, knowing our own personal boundary limits. So this idea of how to manage that role as a caregiver within those boundaries can certainly start by asking yourself what parts of caregiving is something that you and only you can fulfill, and sometimes asking if there's someone else that can meet a care recipient's or person's needs is also a really good question. Sometimes it can feel uncomfortable sitting down with the person that you're caring for to discuss what you can and can't do. But it is really helpful in being clear on your own personal boundaries. And of course, that's going to be different depending on the relationship between the caregiver and the care recipient. Another part around setting healthy boundaries is also giving yourself permission to find small ways to take care of yourself. So setting boundaries are usually in direct feelings or direct conflict of a particular feeling. And so sometimes caregivers can feel worried about the other person's response when a boundary is set and adhered to. And that's normal. Caregivers can also feel that they should be able to cope with a situation even if they feel like their boundaries are being violated. And so giving yourself permission, to feel the way you're feeling, to help identify with how you're feeling, and then be able to think about a need that's going to help with your overall well-being, is an area that we often talk about with family caregivers on the support line and through our webinar and through some of our writings. And of course, finding support is another real key area, and whatever that looks like, whatever your tribe looks like, or however you reach out to find support, whether it's a group of peers or whether it's a close and trusted confidant, it often helps make it easier to set boundaries and be accountable as well. We have in one of our coaching sessions, there are times where we might work with the caregiver for a couple of sessions, and part of it is around this idea of staying accountable. I don't know about you, but sometimes I really value having someone that I trust that will help keep me accountable, especially if I've spoken about setting a boundary or an intention, to kind of help keep my well-being a high priority. It really takes a lot of courage, I think, to set boundaries, and I think it also takes a lot of practice. Well, it does take a lot of practice, and to stay the course. Some other great resources. So on our communication page for our caregiving tips, we have a whole host of resources. So there's webinars, there's articles, all around communication, and communication and boundary setting go hand in hand. And of course, on the other, another page on the site is the emotional side of caregiving. And that, again, has a whole bunch of great downloadable handouts and webinars that you can listen to. Because we have amazing webinars that are led by some really skilled, knowledgeable facilitators and experts. And one of my personal favorites, which I listen to because I think it's important that we also do our best to work on our boundary setting as professionals as well, is this communicating in difficult decisions. So it focuses on nonviolent communication and how we can differentiate from feelings and taking responsibilities for how we're feeling. And the facilitator, Jody, who also does our Caregivers Out Loud podcast, just walks through various scenarios around how to communicate a request and how to accept a request for kind of overall well-being. So I definitely recommend, that's a great webinar. There's also the book, Nonviolent Communication, and it's one of my favorites. And it's built on the premise of what that particular webinar focuses on. The Cowichan Family Caregiver Society also produced a great handout on boundary setting, and it was written by Jody McDonald as well. It's a great resource, I find, and you can find that on our website. The other book I like, and while it's geared towards seniors, because that's my area of expertise, is a book called Working with Toxic Older Adults. Now, that seems a bit negative, the whole sort of toxic, title, but the focus of the book is actually really helping to identify how we're feeling about a situation, how we're feeling about working with a situation, how do we identify with that, and how do we set boundaries around that caregiving role, whether it's personally or professionally. So two great resources. I know there's a lot more out there. So a couple of other places for you to visit. Just finally, where you can find more support and resources outside of our website, of course you can call our support line. All the information is on our Facebook site, and as well as our webpage. Tune into our podcast, I believe the podcast on boundary setting is actually available now. And so you can have another great source of information around the importance of boundary setting. And you can find that, of course, on our website. And it links into our various e-news and social media. And so with that, I just want to say thank you for joining us. It was lovely to be here today. I do apologize about last week had some unforeseen circumstances where I really wasn't feeling well and had to cancel last minute. So I do apologize about that. Thank you for joining us today and look forward to seeing you next week. Have a wonderful week. I hope there's a bit of sunshine wherever you may be. We have beautiful sunshine today, and I'm certainly looking forward to being outside and getting my dose of vitamin D and being out in nature today. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.